Imagine being cast out into a deadly blizzard. No money, no home. Just you, your two small children, and a broken heart. Retired sniper Caleb Thorne thought he had lost everything until his billionaire father-in-law slammed the door on his family. But in the freezing shadows of a derelict cabin, his dog Sarge began to dig. What did this loyal companion find hidden behind a wall of secrets? Could a long-lost military relic be the key to a $150 million fortune? How far will a desperate father go to reclaim his honor? And can a voice from the grave finally bring an empire to its knees? Stick with us until the end to witness the ultimate reckoning. If you believe in justice and the power of a faithful dog, please support us by subscribing to our channel. Chapter 1. The White Night in Vermont. The wind did not just blow. It screamed. It was a northeaster. A ghost of a storm that tore through the green mountains of Vermont, turning the world into a blinding wall of white. Caleb Thorne stood on the manicured driveway of the Montgomery estate. He felt the ice crystals biting into his skin. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the frost in his heart. Beside him, two small figures huddled against his legs. Daisy and Leo. They were only 5 years old. They wore thick coats, but they were trembling. They did not understand why the heavy oak doors of their home had just been slammed shut. They did not understand why their grandfather was standing behind the glass, watching them freeze. "You have no right, Silas," Caleb shouted. His voice was raspy, worn thin by days of mourning. This was Evelyn's home. It is her children's home. Inside the warm, amber glow of the foyer, Silas Montgomery adjusted his silk tie. He looked at Caleb with eyes as hard as flint. He did not speak. He simply signaled to the two private security guards standing on the porch. They stepped forward. Their hands rested on their belts. "Mr. Montgomery says you are a trespasser now, Thorne," one of the guards said. His breath hitched in the cold. "You have 5 minutes to get off the property, or we call the state police." Caleb's hands balled into fists inside his gloves. He was a retired Marine sniper. He had survived the heat of the desert and the sting of shrapnel. He could have ended both men in seconds. But he felt a small gloved hand tugging at his jacket. "Daddy, I am cold," Daisy whispered. Her voice was tiny. It broke his heart. Caleb looked at the grand house one last time. Evelyn was gone. The woman he loved, the light of his life, had been buried only 3 days ago. And now her own father was throwing her family into the teeth of a blizzard. Silas wanted the twins. He wanted the Montgomery bloodline, but he did not want the broken soldier who came with them. "Come on," Caleb said to the children. He turned his back on the mansion. "Into the truck. Now." Sarge, a powerful Belgian Malinois with scars on his muzzle, leapt into the back seat first. He was more than a dog. He was Caleb's spotter in a past life. He sensed the danger. He growled at the guards, a low vibration that rumbled through the snowy air. The old Ford truck groaned as the engine turned over. The heater was broken. The windshield was already a sheet of ice. Caleb gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He drove away. Behind them, the lights of the estate faded into the white void. They were homeless. Caleb's bank accounts had been frozen by Silas's lawyers that morning. He had $60 in his pocket and a half-tank of gas. He drove north. The mountain roads were treacherous. The truck slid toward the edge of a ravine, but Caleb's steady hands brought it back. He was looking for a ghost. A memory. Months ago, Evelyn had handed him a small plain envelope. "If things ever go wrong with my father, Caleb, go here," she had said. She had looked afraid. He had tucked the key and the coordinates into his tactical bag, thinking he would never need them. Hours passed. The twins had fallen into an uneasy sleep, huddled together under a single wool blanket. Sarge watched them. His ears moved back and forth, tracking every sound of the wind. Finally, the headlights hit wood. It was a derelict ranger station buried deep in the national forest. It looked like a ruin. The porch was sagging, the windows were boarded up. Caleb stepped out into the waist-deep snow. He carried the twins one by one into the cabin. The air inside was stagnant and freezing. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth. "Wait here," Caleb told them. He moved with the efficiency of a man in a combat zone. He did not have time to mourn. He had to save his children. He cleared the floor. He found an old wood stove in the corner. His hands worked fast. He gathered dry wood he had stored in the truck. He used a magnesium striker. Sparks flew. A small flame licked the bark. "More," he whispered. "Give me more." The fire caught. The orange light flickered against the peeling wallpaper, but it was not enough. The wind was screaming through the cracks in the logs. Caleb grabbed his gear bag. He pulled out a roll of heavy-duty plastic and a staple gun. He moved to the windows. Bang, bang, bang. He sealed the leaks. He hung old blankets over the doorways. He was creating a thermal bubble, a sniper's hide in the middle of a frozen hell. Once the room was slightly warmer, he opened his pack. He pulled out 2 brown pouches. Military MREs, meal ready to eat, beef stew. He activated the chemical heaters. The steam rose, smelling of salt and preservatives. "Eat," he said, kneeling before Daisy and Leo. "Eat every bite." "What about you, Daddy?" Leo asked. The boy's eyes were wide and red from crying. Caleb forced a smile. "I ate earlier, buddy. I am full." It was a lie. His stomach was twisting with hunger and stress, but he only had 4 meals left. He would not touch a single calorie until he knew they would survive the week. The children ate in silence. They shared a plastic spoon. Sarge sat by the stove, his fur steaming as it dried. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. The cabin groaned under the weight of the snow. Caleb sat in the corner, his back against the door. He held his old service rifle across his lap. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Everything was gone. His wife, his home, his peace. He stared into the dying embers of the fire. A dark thought began to take root in his mind. Maybe Silas was right. Maybe he was just a broken man. Maybe he couldn't protect them. He put his head in his hands. The silence of the cabin felt heavy. It felt like a grave. Then he felt something cold touch his wrist. He looked up. Sarge was standing in front of him. The dog's eyes were intelligent, deep. In his mouth, Sarge held a bundle of fabric. Caleb reached out and took it. It was a silk scarf, emerald green. It smelled of lavender and vanilla. It smelled of Evelyn. "Where did you get this, boy?" Caleb whispered. Sarge nudged Caleb's hand with his wet nose. The dog had pulled it from a hidden pocket in Caleb's own tactical bag. A pocket Caleb had forgotten. Sarge had carried it like a sacred relic. Caleb pressed the scarf to his face. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear her voice. "Don't give up, Caleb. They need you." The grief hit him like a physical blow, but it was different this time. It was no longer a weight that pulled him down. It was a spark. He realized then that this cabin was not a mistake. Evelyn had bought this place through a secret company. She had hidden it from Silas. She knew this day might come. She had provided a fortress for them. She had reached out from the past to give him a fighting chance. Caleb stood up. His joints popped. The exhaustion was still there, but the despair was gone. He looked at Sarge. "You're right." Caleb said softly. "We aren't finished yet." He walked over to the twins. They were curled up together on a pile of coats near the stove. They were finally asleep. Their breathing was shallow but steady. Caleb knelt beside them. He reached out and stroked Leo's hair. He adjusted the blanket over Daisy's shoulder. He looked around the small, dark room. The wind continued to lash the walls. The shadows danced in the firelight. To the rest of the world, this was a shack in the middle of nowhere. To Silas Montgomery, it was a place where Caleb Thorne would go to die. But they were wrong. Caleb returned to his post by the door. He checked the action on his rifle. He looked at the snow piling up against the window glass. "I promise you," he whispered to the sleeping children, "this cabin is the safest place on this earth." He looked toward the direction of the Montgomery estate miles away across the frozen peaks. "Let him come," Caleb said. His voice was a low growl. "Let the whole empire come." Sarge lay down at Caleb's feet. The dog's head rested on his paws, but his eyes stayed open. His ears remained alert. He was the first line of defense. Caleb was the second. Outside, the Vermont winter raged on. The trees snapped under the ice. The mountains screamed. But inside the circle of orange firelight, the Thorne family was still standing. Caleb gripped the emerald scarf in one hand and his rifle in the other. He would not sleep. He would not falter. He would wait for the sun to rise. And when it did, the hunt would begin. The sniper was back in the hide, and this time he had everything to lose. Chapter 2. The Comrade's Instinct. The storm outside had settled into a low, rhythmic moan. Inside the cabin, the air remained thin and sharp. Caleb sat by the wood stove watching the frost crawl across the window panes like frozen ivy. The fire was dying down. He had to conserve the wood. He had to conserve everything. Beside him, Sarge was restless. The Belgian Malinois did not sleep like other dogs. He hovered in a state of constant low-level vigilance. Suddenly, Sarge's ears swiveled. His head snapped toward the back of the cabin. A low vibration started in his chest. Caleb watched him. "What is it, boy?" Sarge stood up. He didn't head for the door. He didn't sniff the air for intruders. Instead, he marched toward an old built-in bookshelf that was sagging under the weight of dust and shadows. The dog began to scratch at the floorboards. Then he moved his paws to a specific wooden panel right behind the bottom shelf. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was an insistent sound, a rhythmic digging. Then came the bark. It wasn't a warning bark. It was a soft, urgent huff, the kind of sound Sarge made when he found a hidden target during training. Caleb frowned. He remembered something then, a memory from a summer long ago when they had visited this place in secret. Evelyn used to laugh as she hid dried venison treats for Sarge. She would tuck them into cracks and corners to keep him busy. "Sarge, she's not there," Caleb whispered. The words felt like lead in his mouth. "There are no treats left, buddy." But Sarge did not stop. He became more frantic. He shoved his nose into the gap between the shelf and the wall. He looked back at Caleb with eyes that were wide and glowing in the firelight. He whined, a high-pitched pleading sound. Caleb stood up. His knees creaked. He walked over to the corner and knelt beside the dog. Sarge immediately stepped back, but he kept his eyes fixed on the panel. He nudged Caleb's hand with his snout. Caleb felt the wood. It was old pine. It felt solid. But when he pressed his thumb against the grain, he felt a slight give, a seam that shouldn't have been there. He reached for his tactical knife. The blade was matte black and razor sharp. He slid the tip into the crevice. He twisted. The wood groaned. Dust and splinters fell to the floor. With a sharp crack, the panel popped outward. Behind the wood was a hollow space. It wasn't empty. Caleb reached in. His fingers brushed against cold, heavy metal. He pulled it out into the light. It was a military-grade steel box, green, weather-sealed. The kind of box designed to survive a flood or a fire. There was no lock, only two heavy latches. Caleb's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He looked at Sarge. The dog sat back on his haunches, his tail giving a single, solemn wag. He knew. Somehow he knew. Caleb flipped the latches. Clack, clack. He opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, were only a few items. A small brass compass, a silver YubiKey hardware device, and an envelope. The envelope was white, clean. On the front, in elegant swirling script, was his name. Caleb. His hands shook as he tore it open. The paper was thick. It smelled of her. That same scent of lavender and vanilla that had been on the scarf. My dearest Caleb, the letter began. If you are reading this, the storm I feared has finally arrived. I know my father. I know that his love is not love. It is possession. I saw the way he looked at our children, like pieces on a chessboard. I saw the way he looked at you, like an obstacle to be cleared away. Caleb swallowed hard. He could hear her voice in the words, clear and steady. I could not tell you this while I was with you. Silas has ears everywhere. He monitors the phones. He tracks the accounts. If he knew I was preparing to leave him with nothing, he would have acted sooner. He would have used my illness against us. My silence was the only shield I had left to protect you. The letter explained the truth. Evelyn had not just been a wealthy socialite. She was the sole heir to her grandmother's estate. A fortune that Silas had spent decades trying to absorb into his own company. But he had failed. The YubiKey in this box is the only way to access the Northern Star Trust. It is held in an independent bank far beyond my father's reach. It contains the inheritance he tried so hard to steal. $150 million, Caleb. It is yours. It belongs to you and the twins. Caleb stopped breathing. The number was too big. It didn't feel real. He looked at the small silver key in the box. It looked like a simple thumb drive, but it was a mountain. It was a fortress. Use this to fight him. The letter continued. Use it to build a life where Silas can never touch our children again. The compass in the box belonged to my grandfather. He always said that as long as you have a needle pointing north, you are never truly lost. You are my North Caleb. You and Daisy and Leo. Forgive me for the secrets. I did it to keep the light alive. Caleb let the letter fall to his lap. The fire in the stove gave a final bright pop. The silence in the cabin was no longer heavy. It was electric. He looked at the twins. They were still asleep, their small faces peaceful in the shadows. They had no idea that their world had just shifted. They were no longer the orphans of a broken soldier. They were the heirs to a kingdom. Caleb felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. As a sniper, he knew that the most dangerous weapon wasn't a rifle. It was information. It was the element of surprise. Silas Montgomery thought he had won. He thought he had pushed a wounded man into the wilderness to die. He thought Caleb was starving, weak, defenseless. He was wrong. Caleb picked up the brass compass. He watched the needle dance. Then it settled. It pointed true. He looked at Sarge. The dog was watching him intently. There was an intelligence in Sarge's eyes that felt almost human. Sarge hadn't found treats. He had found a future. You knew, Caleb whispered. She told you, didn't she? Sarge let out a soft huff. He walked over and rested his heavy head on Caleb's knee. Caleb reached out and pulled the dog into a deep embrace. He buried his face in Sarge's thick fur. He felt the dog's heartbeat. Strong, steady, loyal. Sarge was not just a pet. He was Evelyn's final soldier. He was a living will left behind to ensure that the man she loved would find the way back to the light. Caleb pulled back and looked at the silver YubiKey. It felt heavy in his palm. This was the ammunition. This was the long-range strike that Silas would never see coming. But a sniper does not pull the trigger the moment he sees the target. He waits. He watches the wind. He calculates the distance. He waits for the perfect moment when the enemy feels most secure. Caleb stood up. His movements were different now. The slouch in his shoulders was gone. The exhaustion had been replaced by a cold, calculating fire. He walked to the window. The storm was fading. The first hint of gray light was beginning to touch the horizon. The mountains were vast and unforgiving. "The hunt has changed, Sarge," Caleb said. His voice was a low, dangerous rasp. He looked at the secret box. He looked at the letter. He looked at his children. "Silas thinks he threw us to the wolves." Caleb gripped the brass compass tight. "He didn't realize we are the wolves." He began to pack the items back into the steel box. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace. Every movement had a meaning. Every breath had a purpose. The Northern Star was no longer just a trust fund. It was a mission. And Caleb Thorne had never failed a mission in his life. He sat back down by the door. The rifle was still in his lap. But he wasn't just guarding a cabin anymore. He was guarding an empire. Sarge lay down beside him, his eyes fixed on the door. The dog's ears pricked at the sound of a distant branch snapping under the weight of the snow. They were ready. Let the world come. Let the Montgomery name try to cast its shadow. The needle was pointing north, and Caleb Thorne was finally home. Chapter 3. The $150 million Legacy. The morning sun hit the snow like a million shattered diamonds. It was beautiful. It was blinding. But inside the cabin, the light was cold. Caleb sat at the small wooden table. In front of him sat an old, ruggedized laptop he had kept from his service days. Beside it lay the silver YubiKey. His hands were steady, but his heart felt like a drum. He inserted the key. The screen flickered. A prompt appeared. It asked for a secondary encryption code found only in the margin of Evelyn's letter. He typed it in. The connection was bridged. A secure encrypted VoIP line began to ring. 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 "Identify!" a voice barked. It was a deep voice, a voice that sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. "Echo 7, Sniper, 2nd Battalion," Caleb said. His military call sign felt strange on his tongue after all these years. There was a long silence, then a heavy sigh. "Caleb, is that you, kid?" "It's me, Sam." Samuel Vance was more than a lawyer. He was a former major. He had seen Caleb through the worst days in the desert. He was the only man Evelyn trusted to hold the keys to her kingdom. "I heard about Evelyn." Sam's voice softened. "I am sorry, truly. I tried to reach you, but Silas has a wall of lawyers around that estate. I couldn't get through. He threw us out, Sam. We are at the ranger station, the Northern Star." "I knew she'd send you there," Sam whispered. "Listen to me carefully, Caleb. You are sitting on a mountain of power. That trust. It wasn't just savings. Evelyn invested in tech and land years ago. It has matured. The current balance is $150 million. Caleb closed his eyes. Hearing the number out loud made the room spin. 150 million. It was enough to buy a city. It was enough to change everything. But listen, Sam continued. His tone became sharp, tactical. Silas is watching. If you suddenly buy a mansion and a fleet of cars, he will sue for custody immediately. He will claim you stole it. He will use his judges to take the twins. Caleb gripped the edge of the table. What do I do? We play the ghost strategy, Sam said. You stay invisible. You stay at that cabin. Look poor. Look broken. Let Silas think he is won. While he gets comfortable, he will get sloppy. He will try to harass you. He will try illegal moves. And we will record every single one of them. We don't just beat him, Caleb. We bury him. Caleb looked at the children. Daisy and Leo were playing on the floor with Sarge. They were happy. They didn't know they were wealthy. They only knew they were with their father. Understood, Caleb said. I stay in the shadows. The mission had a new objective. Caleb didn't go to town to buy a new car. Instead, he used a small, untraceable fund Sam activated. He bought equipment, not luxury items, tactical items. Under the cover of the next snowfall, Caleb moved through the trees. He was a ghost in the white. He installed thermal cameras in the pine branches. He buried motion sensors under the perimeter of the snow. He set up a localized encrypted mesh network. The shack was no longer just a shack. It was a high-tech tactical outpost. From his laptop, Caleb could see the heat signature of a squirrel 300 yards away. He could see the cold metal of a vehicle if it ever approached the forest road. But there was another type of training happening inside the cabin. Game time, Caleb called out. The twins scrambled to their feet. Is it the shadow game, Daddy? Leo asked. That's right. Caleb knelt down. If a strange car comes up the road, what is the first thing we do? Get Sarge and go to the cellar, Daisy said firmly. And what about noise? No talking, Leo whispered, putting a finger to his lips. We stay like mice until you give the whistle. Caleb hugged them tight. It pained him to teach them these things. They should be in school. They should be at birthday parties. But this was their reality. Survival was the only way to keep their freedom. He turned his training into a curriculum. He taught them how to read the clouds. He taught them how to find the North Star. He taught them that the woods weren't scary if you knew their secrets. As the days turned into weeks, Silas's desperation began to show. Caleb sat in his hide, a darkened corner of the porch. He had a set of high-powered surveillance optics. He watched a black SUV stop at the edge of the forest road. 2 men in suits stepped out. Private investigators. Silas's dogs. Caleb watched them through the lens. He saw them take photos of the cabin. He saw them point at the woodpile. He saw the sneer on their faces. Click. Caleb's camera captured their faces, their license plate, the way one of them spat on the ground. Every move was a piece of evidence. Every harassment was a nail in Silas's coffin. Despite the millions waiting in a bank in Zurich, Caleb's life remained hard, by choice. He woke up at 4 a.m. The air was always at its coldest then. He stepped outside and began to chop wood. Swing, crack, swing, crack. His muscles burned, his hands became calloused. He could have ordered a truckload of seasoned oak. He could have installed a luxury heating system. But he didn't. He wanted the children to see him working. He wanted them to know that a man's worth wasn't in his bank account. It was in his hands. It was in his word. He took Leo out to track deer in the snow. Watch the wind, Caleb whispered. If the wind is at your back, the woods will tell your secrets. He showed them how to be self-reliant. They learned to mend their own clothes. They learned to cook over the fire. They were becoming strong. They were becoming thorns. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, Caleb sat on the porch. Sarge lay at his feet. The dog's head was resting on Caleb's boot. They looked like a family struggling to survive, an out-of-work veteran and his hungry children. That was the image the world saw. That was the image Silas saw. But inside the cabin, the silver YubiKey glowed in the firelight. $150 million. The power of 1,000 lions. Caleb looked at his hands. They were dirty. They were scarred. But they were steady. He wasn't just a father anymore. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a guardian of a legacy. He looked through his optics one last time toward the road. The SUV was gone. The woods were quiet. "Let them watch," Caleb whispered. Sarge huffed in agreement. The trap was set. The ghost was in position. And the sniper was waiting for the wind to change. Chapter 4. The Silent Siege. The darkness in the Vermont woods was absolute, the kind of black that swallowed the light of the stars. But inside Caleb's cabin, a different kind of light flickered, the blue glow of a tactical tablet. Caleb sat in the shadows. His eyes moved across the screen. The thermal sensors were twitching. 3 heat signatures were moving through the tree line. They were moving in a staggered formation, professional, quiet. But not quiet enough for a man who lived in the silence of a sniper's scope. Outside, the crunch of frozen snow was barely audible. To an untrained ear, it was just the wind. To Caleb, it was the sound of a threat. He felt a nudge at his elbow. Sarge was there. The dog's fur was bristling. His lip was curled back just enough to show the white of his teeth. He didn't growl. He knew better. He was waiting for the command. Caleb tapped a key on his tablet. The perimeter cameras shifted. The figures were dressed in tan jackets. They carried official-looking clipboards, but their boots were heavy combat tread, and their holsters were poorly hidden under their coats. "Child Protective Services," Caleb whispered to the empty room. He felt a cold, sharp anger. "Silas, you are getting desperate." He knew the plan. A late-night snatch and grab. They would claim the environment was unsafe. They would take the twins before Caleb could call a lawyer. And by morning, Daisy and Leo would be locked behind the gates of the Montgomery estate. But Silas had made one fatal mistake. He thought Caleb was alone. Suddenly, a low whistle sounded from the woods to the west. It sounded like an owl, but it had a specific rhythmic cadence. Short, short, long. Caleb's radio earpiece crackled with static. "Alpha 1 in position. We have eyes on the intruders." Caleb closed his eyes for a second. The relief was immense. They had arrived an hour ago. 3 men, 3 brothers from his old unit. Jax, Miller, Saint. They hadn't asked questions. They had just seen the message and driven through the night. They were currently camping in the woods, with high-tech optics and long-range microphones instead of fishing rods. "Hold fire," Caleb commanded into the mic. "We are not using lead tonight. We are using data." The mercenaries approached the porch. One of them reached for the door handle. He didn't knock. He tried the latch. High up in the pine trees, Saint was perched with a long-range directional microphone. The audio fed directly into Caleb's laptop. Recording. Saving. Streaming to a cloud server Samuel Vance had prepared. "Just grab the kids," one of the men whispered outside. "The old man won't do anything. Silas said he's a shell of a man, probably drunk by now." "Watch the dog," the second one replied. "If it barks, use the tranquilizer. We need this to be clean." Caleb sat perfectly still. His heart was a steady rhythm. Record, record, record. The man at the door finally knocked, hard, aggressive. Mr. Thorne. Open up, this is the Department of Children and Families. We have an emergency order. Caleb stood up. He walked to the door. He didn't grab his rifle. He grabbed his phone. He opened the door, just a crack. It is 2 a.m, Caleb said. His voice was flat, cold. We have a report of child endangerment, sir, the lead man said. He tried to shove the door open with his shoulder. We need to take the children into temporary custody for their own safety. Caleb held the door firm. Where is your court order? Where is your identification? The man reached into his pocket and flashed a badge. It was a fake, a good one, but Caleb had seen real federal ID for a decade. Step aside, Thorne, the man sneered. Don't make this harder on yourself. Before Caleb could respond, blue and red lights began to dance against the snow. 2 police cruisers roared up the forest road. They skidded to a halt. Silas Montgomery stepped out of the lead car. He was wearing a long wool coat and a look of triumph. That is enough, Caleb, Silas shouted. He walked up the steps like he owned the mountain. Officers, this man is having a mental breakdown. He is armed. He is dangerous. Look at this hovel. My grandchildren are freezing in there. A local deputy, a man Caleb knew Silas had funded in the last election, stepped forward. Step back, Thorne. We are here to assist the state agents. Let the children out. Caleb didn't flinch. He stepped back, but he didn't run. He opened the door wide. Please, Caleb said. Come in. See for yourselves. The officers and Silas marched into the cabin. They expected to find filth. They expected to find a man broken by whiskey. Instead, they found a warm, bright room. The wood stove was roaring. The shelves were stocked with high-quality food. Daisy and Leo were sitting on a clean rug wrapped in warm blankets reading a book. They didn't look scared. They looked confused. Grandpa, Daisy asked, why are you being so loud? Caleb stood by the table. He pulled a folder from the drawer. Here is the legal deed to this property. It is owned by a private trust. My children are residents here. They are homeschooled, well-fed, and under the care of their father. The deputy looked at Silas. The triumph was fading from the old man's face. It was being replaced by a purple rage. Check the truck, Silas hissed at the mercenaries. He's a junkie. He's got pills, I know it. The mercenaries moved toward the Ford truck parked outside. But Caleb wasn't watching them. He was watching the small screen in his palm. Outside, Sarge was standing by the truck. He wasn't barking. He was watching one of the mercenaries reach into his vest. The man pulled out a small plastic bag of white powder. He leaned toward the open window of the truck. Growl. The sound came from Sarge's throat, a warning from the depths of the earth. The mercenary froze. He looked at the dog. He looked at the bag in his hand. He didn't see the thermal camera hidden in the truck's side mirror. He didn't see the high-resolution lens in the tree. Officer, Caleb said inside the cabin, you might want to look at my security feed. It seems one of Mr. Montgomery's agents is trying to plant something in my vehicle. The deputy looked at the tablet Caleb held up. The image was crystal clear. The man in the tan jacket was caught mid-frame. The bag of drugs was visible. His face was visible. Saint, this is Alpha. Caleb spoke into the air. Take them. Suddenly the woods exploded with light. High-intensity tactical strobes blinded the men outside. Jax and Miller stepped out of the shadows. They didn't have guns. They had cameras. And they had the silence of professional soldiers. Drop it, Jax's voice boomed. Everything is being recorded live-streamed to the state attorney's office. The mercenary dropped the bag like it was a hot coal. He turned to run, but Miller was already there, blocking the path. Inside the cabin, Silas's face went white. His hands began to shake. "This is a setup," Silas screamed. "You're a murderer. You're a loser." Caleb stepped closer to Silas. He was much taller than the old man. He smelled of wood smoke and old leather. He looked like the hunter he was. "No, Silas," Caleb whispered. "This is a recording. Every word you said, every threat those men made, the attempted kidnapping, the planted evidence, it is all on the server now. My lawyer, Samuel Vance, is watching the feed right now." The deputy's radio chirped. A frantic voice came through. "Chief, we just got a call from the state attorney. There is a live feed of a felony in progress at the Thorne property. We are being ordered to stand down and secure the scene for federal investigators." The deputy looked at Silas. Then he looked at Caleb. He took a step back. "Mr. Montgomery, I think you should leave. Now." "Leave!" Silas shrieked. "I pay your salary." "Actually," Caleb said, "the taxpayers do, and I think they'd like to know why you brought mercenaries to a private home in the middle of the night." Silas looked at the twins. He looked at the dog. He realized for the first time that he wasn't looking at a broken man. He was looking at a wolf in a den he had built himself. Silas turned and stormed out into the night. The police followed their lights fading as they drove away in shame. The cabin went quiet. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Daisy ran to Caleb and hugged his waist. "Is the game over, Daddy?" Caleb lifted her up. He kissed her forehead. "The game is just beginning, sweetheart. But the bad men are gone." Jax and Miller walked into the cabin. They looked at Caleb and gave a sharp military nod. No words were needed. The perimeter was secure. The evidence was locked. Caleb walked to the porch. Sarge was sitting by the truck guarding the bag of drugs until the real authorities arrived. The dog looked up at Caleb. He let out a single, satisfied huff. Caleb looked out at the dark woods. The silent siege was over. But the war had moved to a new front. Silas had shown his hand. He had tried to steal the children. He had tried to frame a soldier. And he had done it all on camera. Caleb gripped the railing of the porch. He felt the cold air in his lungs. It felt like victory. "Thank you, Evelyn," he whispered to the wind. The northern star was shining bright tonight, and Silas Montgomery was finally beginning to see its light, the light that would burn his empire to the ground. Chapter 5. Justice in the Green Mountains. The city of Montpelier was draped in a fresh layer of morning frost. The gold dome of the State House shimmered in the distance, but all eyes were fixed on the granite steps of the courthouse. Caleb Thorne stepped out of his truck. He was not wearing his tactical gear today. He wore a dark, well-fitted suit that Samuel Vance had sent to the cabin. He looked tall. He looked immovable. Beside him, Daisy and Leo held his hands. They were quiet. They sensed the weight of the day. And at Caleb's heel walked Sarge. The dog's coat was brushed. His eyes were alert. He moved with the quiet dignity of a veteran on parade. As they approached the heavy bronze doors, a fleet of black sedans pulled up. Silas Montgomery stepped out. He was surrounded by a phalanx of 6 lawyers in $1,000 shoes. Silas did not look at Caleb. He looked at the courthouse as if he were about to purchase it. He wore a smile that was sharp and predatory. He was confident. He believed that in this world, gold always outweighed the truth. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with the smell of old paper and floor wax. The gallery was packed. The incident at the cabin had leaked to the press. The story of the homeless sniper and the billionaire grandfather had set the state on fire. Judge Martha Holloway took the bench. She was a woman who looked like she was carved from Vermont marble. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the mountain of paperwork on her desk. "This is a hearing for the permanent custody of Daisy and Leo Thorne," she began. Her voice was low and resonant. "Mr. Montgomery, your counsel claims that the father is unfit due to psychological instability and lack of resources. Do you have anything to add?" Silas's lead attorney stood up. "Your Honor, Caleb Thorne is a man living in a shack. He has no income. He has a history of combat-related trauma. Our client, Mr. Montgomery, simply wishes to provide these children with the security and medical care they deserve." Caleb sat perfectly still. He did not flinch. He did not argue. He waited for the signal. Samuel Vance stood up slowly. He opened a leather briefcase. "Your Honor," Sam began, "we are not here to discuss a shack. We are here to discuss a conspiracy." The courtroom went silent. "Mr. Thorne is not a man of no means," Sam said. He pulled out a certified bank statement from Zurich. "He is the sole trustee of the Northern Star Fund, a trust valued at $150 million. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Silas's smile vanished. He leaned forward, his face turning a dark shade of red. "That is a lie!" Silas shouted. "That money belongs to the Montgomery Corporation." "Silence, Mr. Montgomery," the judge snapped. Sam continued. "Furthermore, we have evidence of a systematic attempt to destroy a veteran's reputation. We have intercepted communications showing that Mr. Montgomery paid a private physician to falsify Mr. Thorne's military medical records. He wanted to make a healthy man look like a danger to his own children." Sam tapped a button on his tablet. The large monitors in the courtroom flickered to life. They showed the thermal footage from the cabin. The gallery watched in horror as the mercenary tried to plant drugs in Caleb's truck. They heard the audio of Silas's agents discussing the snatch and grab. But the final blow was yet to come. "There is one more piece of evidence," Sam said softly. "A voice that has been silenced for too long." The screen went dark for a moment. Then a face appeared. It was Evelyn. She looked thin. Her hair was shorter than Caleb remembered, but her eyes were bright. She was sitting in the very cabin where Caleb had sought refuge. "If this video is being played," Evelyn's voice filled the room, "it means my father has done exactly what I feared." Silas slumped in his chair. His hands were shaking. "I am making this statement of my own free will," Evelyn said. "Caleb Thorne is the greatest man I have ever known. He is the greatest father I could have dreamed of for my children. He is my rock. He is my heart." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "My father Silas does not love my children. He loves power. He loves control. I have moved my grandmother's inheritance to protect it from his greed. Caleb, if you are watching this, I am so proud of you. Judge, I beg you, protect my family from the man who tried to break me. Do not let him take my children." The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the soft sobbing of someone in the back row. Caleb felt a tear roll down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He looked at Silas. The old man looked small, shriveled. Judge Holloway looked at Silas with a gaze that could have frozen the sun. "Mr. Montgomery," the judge said. Her voice was like a hammer. "This is no longer a custody hearing. This is a crime scene." She turned to the bailiffs. "I am awarding sole and permanent custody of Daisy and Leo Thorne to their father Caleb Thorne, effective immediately." Caleb felt Leo grab his hand. He felt Daisy lean against his shoulder. "But I am not finished," the judge continued. "Based on the evidence of witness tampering, falsification of records, and the attempted kidnapping caught on camera, I am issuing a warrant for the arrest of Silas Montgomery. This falls under federal racketeering statutes." Silas stood up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," the judge said. "You are a man under arrest." Two federal marshals stepped forward. They did not care about his wool coat. They did not care about his lawyers. They grabbed Silas's arms and pulled them behind his back. Click. The sound of the handcuffs echoed through the courtroom. The media cameras began to flash. Silas tried to hide his face, but there was nowhere to hide. The Montgomery name was being dragged through the dust. The empire was crumbling in real time. Caleb stood up. He didn't look back at Silas. He didn't need to. The sniper had taken the shot, and the target had fallen. "Let's go home," Caleb whispered to the twins. They walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was filled with reporters. Microphones were shoved in Caleb's face. "Mr. Thorne, how do you feel? What will you do with the money?" Caleb ignored them. He kept his eyes on the exit. They stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The cold air felt clean. The Green Mountains stood tall in the distance. They were a symbol of endurance. They were a symbol of truth. Caleb stopped at the top of the stairs. He looked down at his children. He looked at Sarge. The dog was sitting proudly, his tail brushing the stone steps. For the first time in a long time, the weight on Caleb's chest was gone. The shadows of the past had been chased away by the light. "Is the war over, Daddy?" Leo asked. Caleb picked the boy up. He tucked Daisy under his other arm. "Yes, Leo," Caleb said. "The war is over. We won." They walked down the steps toward the truck. The sun was high in the sky now. It warmed the stone. It melted the ice. Caleb Thorne was no longer a ghost in the woods. He was a father. He was a man of honor. And he was finally truly free. As they drove away from Montpellier, the gold dome faded in the rearview mirror. Sarge put his head out the window, the wind catching his ears. Caleb reached over and touched the emerald scarf resting on the dashboard. The northern star had led them home, and it would never stop shining. Chapter 6. The northern star shines. The snows of Vermont eventually surrendered. The white blanket that had once threatened to swallow Caleb Thorne and his children began to weep into the soil. Green shoots broke through the softening earth. The air no longer carried the scent of ice. It smelled of damp pine and the promise of life. The old ranger station was gone. In its place stood a sprawling ranch built of cedar and stone. It did not look like a monument to wealth. It looked like part of the mountain itself. This was the Thorne Canine Center. Caleb stood on the wide porch. He watched the sunlight dance across the meadows. Down in the training yard, a group of men and women were walking with dogs. They were veterans. Some walked with prosthetic limbs. Others walked with the invisible scars of the mind. Beside them were Belgian Malinois Labradors and shepherds. Caleb had not used Evelyn's millions to build a private paradise. He had used them to build a sanctuary. The center was dedicated to those who had served and those who lived in silence. It was a place where wounded souls found their four-legged mirrors. It was a place where healing began with a wagging tail and a cold nose. The transformation was not just in the buildings, it was in the valley. The town that had once turned its back on the homeless veteran now looked to the ranch as a beacon. It provided jobs. It provided hope. It was the legacy Evelyn had intended all along. Caleb turned as the door creaked open. Daisy and Leo ran out, followed by a chorus of happy barks. They were taller now. Their faces were brown from the sun and bright with laughter. They spent their afternoons helping socialize the puppies. They were learning that the greatest power in the world was the power to help another. Caleb watched them and felt a profound sense of peace. He was no longer a ghost hiding in the shadows. He was a father. He was a teacher. He was home. Miles away inside the sterile walls of a federal facility, a different kind of life was unfolding. Silas Montgomery sat in a small gray room. The silk ties were gone. The mahogany desk was gone. The empire he had spent a lifetime building had been dismantled brick by brick to pay for his crimes. He sat by a narrow window. He spent his days staring at the sky. He realized too late the terrible math of his life. He had traded his daughter's love for a stock price. He had traded his grandchildren's laughter for a seat at a boardroom table. He had all the power he ever wanted, and now he had no one to share a meal with. Once a year, an envelope would arrive for him. There was no return address. There were no words inside, only a single photograph. A photo of 2 children and a dog standing in a field of wildflowers. They looked happy. They looked free. They looked like they didn't remember his name. Caleb did not seek revenge. He did not need to. Silas was living in a prison of his own making, haunted by the ghost of a family he had thrown away. The silence was the greatest punishment of all. Back at the ranch, Sarge was busy. The old warrior was the unofficial king of the facility. He spent his days supervising the younger dogs with a stern but patient gaze. But today Sarge was interested in the garden. The dog began to dig near a patch of early spring lilies. Caleb watched from the porch, a smile tugging at his lips. "Sarge, leave the flowers alone," he called out. Sarge ignored him. He dug with purpose. His paws threw up dark, rich earth. Finally, he stopped and dipped his head into the hole. He trotted back to the porch, his head held high. He dropped an object at Caleb's feet. It was small. It was tarnished with age. The brass compass from the secret box. Caleb picked it up. He wiped away the dirt with his thumb. The glass was still clear. Inside, the needle trembled for a moment. Then it swung with perfect precision. It pointed north. Caleb felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was a sign. A final message from the woman who had saved them. The needle was a reminder. No matter how far they traveled, they would always have their direction. That evening, the sun set in a blaze of purple and gold. The air turned crisp as the stars began to poke through the velvet sky. Caleb gathered the twins and Sarge. They walked out to a stone fire pit overlooking the valley. The fire crackled. The orange sparks flew up toward the heavens. Leo leaned his head on Caleb's shoulder. Daisy sat with her arm draped over Sarge's neck. Caleb looked up. High above the jagged peaks of the Green Mountains, one star shone brighter than the rest. The North Star. The constant. The guide. "Is Mommy watching us?" Daisy asked softly. Caleb pulled them closer. The firelight reflected in his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered. "She's the one making sure the path is clear." The mountains were quiet. The ranch was at rest. The soldier was finally at peace. Under the brilliant night sky, the legacy of Evelyn Thorne lived on. Not in the millions of dollars, not in the stone and wood, but in the heartbeat of the children who knew they were loved, and in the loyalty of the dog who had found the way. The northern star continued to shine, and for the first time in his life, Caleb Thorne didn't need a map. He was exactly where he was meant to be. In the silence of the Vermont woods, we learn that the greatest treasures are never kept in vaults. but in the hearts of those who stay when the world walks away. Love is the only compass that never fails, and loyalty is the light that guides us through the deepest snow. If this story touched your heart, please join our family by subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below, so we can continue to honor the bond between humans and their most faithful companions. Your support keeps these stories alive, and we invite you to click the video on your screen now to join us on another journey of courage and hope.